When British North America was first being settled, there was an amazing amount of fervent Christians who created many of the original colonies. Puritan writer Cotton Mather put it this way in 1702. The God of heaven served, as it were, a summons upon the spirits of his people in the English nation, stirring up the spirits of thousands which never saw the faces of each other, with a most unanimous inclination to leave all the pleasant accommodation of their native country and go over a terrible ocean into a more terrible desert for the pure enjoyment of all his ordinances. But by the mid-1700s, much of the people in America were already due for a spiritual revival.
From the beginning of the settlement of the various colonies for the first 150 years or so, the separate colonies of America were generally not in touch with each other. Each would be in touch on their own with Mother England. If a colony needed its charter approved, this meant someone had to go to Britain to work it out. Two developments in the mid-18th century caused the colonies to begin to communicate with each other: the French and Indian War and the Great Awakening.
One of the most significant things that happened in American history happened in the 1730s and 40s, and it's called the First Great Awakening. The colonies were Christian, but they were all segmented into 13 different colonies. They weren't really united until George Whitefield came from Great Britain.
The Great Awakening was a spiritual movement with political consequences. It reached its zenith with George Whitefield, but this powerful series of religious revivals all began with a humble Calvinist minister named Jonathan Edwards.
He's well known in history books as the man who had the sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. So it's in many textbooks. But it wasn't just the sermon, it was his life and his preaching helped bring about what's called the First Great Awakening in America, that led to the salvation of up to half of the South and 1/3 of the North.
Although Jonathan Edwards is respected today for his theological and philosophical genius, he was not always appreciated in his own lifetime.
He was fired by his own church. As he sat home on a Saturday, he would hear a knock at the door. And one of the elders, one of the church leaders that had actually been involved in his dismissal, would say, "We don't have anyone to fill the pulpit. Would you come back and preach again?" And instead of having a spirit of animosity, he humbly and graciously consented. And even after being terminated, he continued to fill the pulpit a week at a time because that's what God had called him to do.
But all that was to take place in 1750. Meanwhile, in the mid-1730s, under Jonathan Edwards' preaching, in a series of sermons on the doctrine of justification by faith alone, revival broke out.
In the spring and summer following Anno 1735, the town seemed to be full of the presence of God. It never was so full of love nor of joy, and yet so full of distress as it was then. Jonathan Edwards.
The distress refers to agonizing over sin, leading to repentance. One such person who repented and was transformed was a woman with a notorious reputation.
The other people in the town said, well, if she can be saved, maybe there's some truth to the claims of Christ. And that was what helped spawn the Great Awakening.
Out of a total population of 300,000 in New England from 1740 to 1742, 25,000 to 50,000 people joined the churches. This religious movement, noted author Robert Flood, changed the entire moral tone of New England for the better. And as it turns out, the Great Awakening was just getting started.
Jonathan Edwards, who was later appointed to be the president of Princeton, was the flashpoint of the early stages of the Great Awakening. Edwards had a brilliant mind, and even in our own day, scholars still study his sermons and his writings. But despite his incredible intellect, he was also very humble. He once said, Nothing sets a person so much out of the devil's reach as humility. America was born largely because of the Christian character of men and women like that. For Providence Forum, I'm Jerry Newcomb.